I recently got into a conversation with a younger colleague of mine. He was dropping me off at the airport. And he told me he was thinking about changing his car. He currently has a Camry and he wants to get a Benz. And he wanted to get my opinion. And not because he was not clear that a Mercedes-Benz is obviously more sexy than a Camry, but he was worried about the impression that currently exists in Enugu, where it's assumed that most people who drive Mercedes-Benz cars are 419 or fraudulent people. And my response to him was very firm and straightforward. I told him, you need to get that Mercedes-Benz. Now, I took that position because I wanted my team to be part of the people that would change that narrative, that would change that impression that only fraudulent people can earn a decent living. There was a time when Mercedes-Benz was associated with, members of the academic community, lecturers to be precise. So it was a lot easier to run into someone who owns a Mercedes-Benz in UNEC or University of Nigeria Nsukka campus. At that time, most of them came back from their studies, from outside the country, mostly the western part of the world. And they usually would come back with their Mercedes-Benz, and some of them also made effort to get their beautiful foreign wives, down with them also. And that was what the life was then. And it was beautiful. The academia held our best. The best of our people were interested in being in the academia because they held a lot of respect at that time. It was attractive to be a part of that community. But over time, things happened. We lived different choices. A mix of combination of bad governance, bad leadership, and some wrong choices we made as a people, landed, the entire country in a very bad situation. And of course, the academia included. And things turned for the worse. Most of the members of the academia were so broke that they could hardly pay attention. And of course, you don't need money to pay attention. But that's how broke some of them were. Some of them had to begin to use their beautiful Mercedes-Benz for taxi shuttle services. Kabu Kabu, we used to call them in those days. And I'm sure some of us remember this scenario, as it were. Now, while that was happening, what was happening in the academia was also a reflection of what was happening in the real world. The real world was not decoupled from the academia. So at that same time, some of our brothers were also making choices that we are not particularly proud of. And the interesting thing is that some of those choices they were making, our people were arguing for or against some of those less venerating choices. And while they were doing that, they were enjoying the instant stupendous wealth that came, as proceeds of crime. Some parents adopted a don't ask, don't tell scenario, where they are not ready to ask their kids where they got the money from because they don't want to hear the truth. And even our pretty girls at that time, did not miss out of the groove. So they would rather come back with, we call them chairmen then. So they would rather come back with that 419 guy versus the brilliant, smart, young academic who has prospects but with an empty pocket. And gradually, the whole value system started eroding. And that was where all of us soiled our hands. The system started respecting and venerating, giving the kind of reverence that is only due to, nobles, to criminals and known 419, individuals. And it didn't end there. At that time, it was almost like it became more attractive. People felt more comfortable being criminals than being poor. And sadly, in a globalized society, one of the outcomes or one of the effects of a highly globalized community is that information mobility is so high. So whatever you do here opens up, to the rest of the world. So there is really no hiding place. And it's just a matter of time, the criminals get caught. And all of us are aware of the stories that have been making rounds. Quite recently, we heard about, the 80 Nigerians that were arrested in the US by FBI or charged for fraud and fraud-related conspiracies to commit fraud. In Saudi Arabia, a good bunch of Nigerians were also arrested for drug-related charges. And we're also aware of the OB Invictus saga. All those things picked up significant traction on the social media and went further to degenerate or to destroy the value or the brand equity we have as a people. But I am one of those people who believe that those stories don't represent Nigerians. Those stories hardly represent us. Because while all that is happening, we still have Nigerians that made the right choices. We still have Nigerians that are making us proud, both locally and globally. We have the likes of Chimamanda Adichie, Akinwumi, Adeshina Akinwumi, Jelani Aliyu, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Phil Oswa, Professor Phil Oswa, and I'm going to say a lot about him, in the course of this my conversation, Jason Njoko, and Divine Oduduru. I want to say something about Divine Oduduru, which goes to buttress the fact that you can actually make the right choices and live an enviable life. A couple of years back, less than 2 years ago, there was this video that was making rounds in social media about a gentleman who said, "I never expected it." I mean, it's when my daughter wants to be funny, she says, "I never expected it," when you do something for her. But that was Divine Oduduru. That was when he started off as an outlet in Nigeria. And at that time, all he had was maybe passion and energy. Now, recently, he won a race in America, and then a journalist approached him again and asked him the same question. And he said a different thing. He said, "I worked for it, and I got it." That is the Nigerian spirit. About 20 years ago, I left Lagos after I finished school. In fact, as a matter of fact, I grew up in Ababa. A neighborhood that is not as posh as a lot of you would have wanted. A neighborhood where a lot of people like me got wasted by drugs and some other vices that plague our society. But I was lucky I made choices that didn't keep me there, like some of my colleagues or friends are still there. I made a choice to go to school and finish school with a degree in computer science and engineering. And then, like every other young man, I lacked, clarity of direction. I didn't know what, I was going to do specifically, but I was determined to be successful. The path to that success wasn't very clear, but there were certain things that I knew in my heart were complete no. So I took off to Lagos. And I remember very clearly that my trip to Lagos, I went to Lagos in 2 days by road because I took a night bus. And we got to Opiweka, and then the bus packed up. Whether it packed up by choice or it packed up because it couldn't move again, we packed up and we only took off much later at night. And we eventually got to Lagos some 30 or so hours later. I got to Lagos, got my first job in Lagos, and that job I got wasn't particularly the kind of job I wanted. I did it for like 4 months, but I gave it my very best. The only thing I didn't commit to that job was my blood. I did that job like my entire life depended on it, and that's the way to do it. Even while I knew that that wasn't my permanent point. Like 4 months down the line, I got lucky, got a job with, at that time, one of the top commercial banks in Nigeria, Diamond Bank to be precise. With an engineering degree, I got a job as a financial analyst. I threw my whole life into that job. Did it like my life, in fact, nothing else mattered. And I did it for a while. And at some point again, I got an offer from what used to be Anderson Consulting, present day Accenture, to join them as a technology consultant. Now, but there's a snag to that offer. I got an offer that was going to give me less cash than what I was making in Diamond Bank. In Diamond Bank, I was making more money than the average young man needed. And that was a very tough decision for every young man to make. So I had two worlds ahead of me. I could follow the money, or I could follow knowledge. Accenture promised me a whole new world of knowledge. I was going to learn how to get things done. I was going to learn about different things, because the nature of consulting is that you actually get on different kinds of engagements almost every 3 or 6 months, depending on the nature of the engagement. And each engagement is almost like a new learning opportunity. And of course, to prepare you for those engagements, you get trained. So while Diamond Bank promised me a lot of money on the immediately, Accenture promised me an opportunity to learn. Tough decision, but I made the right choice. I left money and followed knowledge. I left Diamond Bank and joined Accenture. And then it continued. And in the course of my career, I had to make several choices. But I had a principle that was guiding my choices. I told myself that at this early stage of my career, that what I need is knowledge. At the end of the day, you are what you know. The value people are going to place on you is a function of what you know. If you seek knowledge, then it means that people are going to place a lot more premium on you than otherwise. So that became my guiding principle as I made choices, in the course of my career. And then it got to a point where I felt, okay, now maybe I should begin to think about giving back to the society. And one of the ways I felt to could give back to the society was at that time to champion the establishment of an IT company that is going to be world-class by all standards. My view at that time was that most of the technology companies that were existing in Nigeria at that time were essentially pushing boxes. None of them, very few of them, were actually involved in active technology services. They were pushing boxes. So you needed servers, they sell servers to you. You need workstations, they sell to you. You need licenses, they get those licenses, sell to you. Nobody was interested in actual services, in actual folding of sleeves and getting things done. So I felt that if I could pull a team of young guys who share the same vision and would set up a world-class organization that would have done so well by doing that. Now, I also felt that if I was thinking about building a world-class organization, that I also need world-class education. I need world-class academic experience. And then I applied and got admitted into INSEAD, arguably the best business school in the whole world. At the time I went to INSEAD, I had a tuition fee of 90,000 euros. In present-day terms, it's going to be anywhere between 35 and 40 million naira. This was the kind of money my contemporaries at that time, and even now, will use to fuel their lifestyle. It was a tough choice, but I also made that choice. I went to school, shut down. Now, while I was in school, the school became like a good getaway to see things from the outside and really helped in the formative years of Tennessee. Because by the time I was done with the program, Tennessee was already fully formed and operating. Now, that is my story. And it didn't end there. As Tennessee started to blossom, my colleagues and myself said to ourselves, you know what? Maybe we should also give back to the society by stopping a lot of young men from getting on a night bus and seeking employment in Lagos. At a time, it didn't seem like there were enough technology opportunities to engage a company of the class of Tennessee. We set up a presence in Enugu. And by coming down to Enugu at that time, it gave us access to understand a lot more about how the society was evolving. And I promise you, we were not impressed with what we saw. The average guy in this town wanted to be two things: a politician and 419. That is the truth. That was our understanding. The average guy wanted to get into politics, or he wanted to be a 419 guy. And then, to be honest, I really don't have anything against politicians. I mean, even though we don't really have the best of them. But reality is that all of us, all our young people can become politicians. Because what it means is that at least 80% of them are going to be thugs. So we said, what are we going to do? We need to create a new set of role models. We need to create some other kinds of people that will exist in this Enugu, so that when our young people see them, they will say, Gini konya neme, what does this guy do? And then he's going to hear a different response, because he's not going to hear that he's a job man, and he's also not going to get the response that he's a politician. So we felt that we could also create a new set of role models. And then we said the best way to do it is to deploy an incubator in Enugu. And we deployed Genesis Tech Hub in Enugu. When the Vice President came to Genesis Tech Hub last year, the Vice President said that he's been around Nigeria, he's visited a lot of tech hubs, that this is by far the best and the biggest he's seen. And it is here in the city of Enugu. Now, in putting it all together, the only difference between myself, my colleagues, and some other people that stand today as different role models in Enugu by reason of the choices they've made is actually a function of the things they said yes to and the things they said no to. Like I said initially, life is entirely a journey of choices. And guess what? You really don't need to be an Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. You don't need to be an Akumi Adesina. You don't want to be any of the big names. You don't even need to travel abroad. The idea is that in whatever thing you do, in that your sphere of influence, do the right thing. Whatever time you have an opportunity to make a decision, understand that your decision is going to have a collateral effect, whether good or bad, to the overall brand equity we have as a people, Nigerians. Begin to see things not just from your own perspective again, but begin to see things in terms of how your choices will affect the people around you, how you're going to be perceived, and how ultimately your country is going to be perceived. A lot of people give the impression that it doesn't matter. It actually does matter at the end of the day. It may seem like today in Nigeria that it's actually more honorable to be a criminal than to be poor. But I promise you, it's not sustainable. You know why? Because Nigeria is not decoupled from the rest of the world. You see the way the story of Invictus Obi was everywhere. The way the story of the 80 guys that were arrested for fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. That is the way everything that happens in today's world will be thrown in the open. So, in closing, in whatever you do, no matter how big or small, you remember that you are part of a big global community, that the choices you make will influence how the people that you are part of will be defined. So you make choices that will get us to be defined on the right side. Thank you very much.